For 12 years, Adam Memphis was the silent backbone of North Peak Engineering, the man every commander trusted, the man who delivered when no one else could. But when Kenneth Shaw, the arrogant heir, looked him in the eye and said he was easily replaceable, Adam didn't argue. He walked away. And in his absence, North Peak discovered the brutal truth. Adam Memphis wasn't just valuable, he was the empire itself. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the North Peak Engineering lobby as I stepped through the glass doors, suitcase still marked with airline tags from Colorado Springs. A week away, fresh mountain air still clinging to my jacket, and for the first time in years I had felt rested. I expected at least a polite nod from the staff, maybe even a welcome back. What I got instead was Kenneth Hoffman. He leaned in the doorway of his corner office, arms crossed, lips curled into that smug half-smile he reserved for moments when he thought he had the upper hand. "Now that you're finally back," he said, voice dripping with disdain, "hope you know you're easily replaceable." That was it. No welcome. No acknowledgement of my 12 years here. Just those words, sharp and dismissive. For a second, I thought I misheard him. But no, Kenneth savored the silence afterward, as if daring me to react. I set my briefcase by my desk, keeping my movements steady, deliberate. "Thanks for letting me know," I said evenly, though my jaw tightened as I forced the words out. Kenneth chuckled, as though he'd delivered some brilliant joke. Then he vanished back into his office, adjusting his tie, pausing just long enough at the reflective surface of his monitor to admire himself. Through the glass partition, I watched him, that corner office casting him as a man of importance. 3 years ago, it had been Jonathan Rivers I reported to directly, the CEO who hired me right out of the Navy. Back then, I sat across from Jonathan every Monday morning, mapping out contracts and cultivating the government relationships that kept this company's doors open. Now I was just another engineer in Kenneth's eyes. To him, I was nothing more than a cheap suit in a cubicle. I pulled up my email. 47 messages waited for me, all tied to the Henderson defense contract. Kenneth's big fish. $25 million on paper, the kind of deal he bragged about in boardrooms and cocktail hours. But every one of those messages was directed to me. Every procurement nuance, every timeline adjustment, every request from Colonel Patricia Barnes, they all had my name on them. The phone rang. I recognized the voice immediately, Colonel Barnes herself. "Adam, good to have you back. We need to discuss Phase 2 timelines." Her tone was brisk, efficient, but beneath it there was trust. She spoke as if she'd been waiting specifically for me to return. I pulled up the specifications, answering with the fluency of someone who'd lived inside these contracts for years. Across the office, Kenneth's muffled voice bled through the glass as he boasted on another call, probably feeding Jonathan the same recycled lines. "The team really stepped up. Good leadership makes all the difference." I ended my call with Barnes, staring at the cursor blinking on a bookmarked job site I'd never dared click before. My hand hovered over the mouse. 12 years. 12 years of building a network invisible to Kenneth. 12 years of flying out to secure meetings that weren't on any company calendar, memorizing procurement cycles, learning which officers required face-to-face briefings and which ones answered midnight phone calls. Kenneth had none of that. He couldn't even spell half the acronyms in the documents I filed. Yet he strutted through the office like the government division was his empire. He straightened his jacket, walked past my desk without looking at me. "Quarterly reports due Friday," he tossed over his shoulder. Then, with that same smirk, "And Adam, next time you take vacation during a critical contract phase, maybe give the team a heads up." The word team stung. There was no team. There was me. Me and the relationships I'd cultivated since I was 27, fresh out of deployments no one was allowed to mention in public. I watched him walk toward the elevator, the weight of his arrogance finally settling on me like a verdict. But what pressed down harder wasn't anger, it was clarity. The kind that cuts through fog like a blade. For the first time, I saw Kenneth not just as an incompetent boss or a petty man desperate to polish his ego. I saw him as a liability. A man whose arrogance could undo everything I had built, not because he was powerful, but because he was careless. And in that moment, sitting at my desk with the cursor blinking on a job site, I realized something I had never admitted to myself before. Kenneth was wrong about me being easily replaceable. But he was right about something else. If I stayed, I'd be replaced eventually. If not by him, then by the blindness of a system that valued corner offices and MBAs over trust, clearance, and lived experience. Something shifted inside me. The kind of shift you don't come back from. Before Kenneth, there had been Jonathan Rivers. The man who built North Peak from the ground up and the man who looked me in the eye 12 years ago and said, "I don't need another paper pusher. I need someone who knows how government contracts really work." I still remember that first meeting. I was 27, just back from a Navy deployment where my job was to move critical equipment through procurement channels in parts of the world the Pentagon never acknowledged. I carried those scars, of secrecy, of urgency, of responsibility where failure meant more than a balance sheet. Jonathan recognized it immediately. For nearly a decade, I reported directly to him. Monday mornings, 7 a.m., his office smelled of black coffee and printer ink. We went line by line through contracts, upcoming renewals, and pipeline opportunities. He valued not just the deals I brought in but the way I understood the unspoken language of procurement, the patience, the trust building, the late-night calls to calm jittery colonels before deadlines. Jonathan always said the same thing: "It's not about being the cheapest bid, Adam. It's about being the partner they trust not to screw it up." He knew the truth of this industry. He knew my value. Then came the restructuring. The word that kills loyalty more than layoffs ever could. Jonathan called it growing pains. He said the company needed layers of management to keep up with expansion. That's when Kenneth arrived. MBA from some program in Atlanta. Polished resume. Glossy confidence. Fresh perspective, Jonathan called it. I gave him the benefit of the doubt at first. 3 days of my life went into preparing a full breakdown of our government business, 12 active contracts, 18 prospects, and the relationship map that lived partly in my head, partly in classified folders. It was the lifeblood of North Peak's government division. Kenneth sat across from me, leaning back in his chair, pen tapping the table. I walked him through every detail: who needed handholding, who demanded perfection, which officers required face-to-face visits in Washington. I thought I saw interest in his eyes. But at the end, he leaned forward, smirked, and asked, "Can't we just bid lower and win more?" That should have been my warning. Over the next 3 years, I watched him worm his way into the spotlight. At board meetings, he presented my contracts as his strategic wins. He threw around buzzwords like efficiency and scalability, while I spent nights triple-checking technical requirements to make sure our bids didn't implode. It wasn't just the credit stealing. It was his blindness. He thought government contracts were no different from pouring concrete or bidding on office parks. He didn't understand security clearance. Didn't understand that Colonel Barnes trusted me because I'd proven myself under pressure, not because my resume had fancy acronyms. He never saw how much of our success lived in the space between rules and relationships. What made it worse was the way he began to believe his own lies. He strutted into meetings, voice full of borrowed authority, saying the government division was finally running like a real business unit. As if the previous 11 years of steady growth had been some amateur experiment. But the procurement officers knew. They always asked for me. They called me directly, scheduled meetings around my availability. Kenneth could stand at a podium and bask in applause, but in the real rooms that mattered, his name carried no weight. And I endured it, month after month. Loyalty. Habit. Fear of starting over. Call it what you want. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as the contracts came through. But every time Kenneth cut me off mid-sentence in front of Jonathan, every time he used the team as a mask for my work, the cracks spread a little further. Until the day he leaned against that office door, smirked, and told me I was easily replaceable. Those words weren't just an insult. They were a prophecy. Because if Kenneth truly believed them, then one day Jonathan might too. And when the man in charge starts mistaking arrogance for competence, loyalty becomes suicide. The Henderson contract was more than ink on paper. $25 million to develop and supply modular comm systems to the Army, gear designed to withstand desert heat, mountain snow, and the bureaucratic hell of procurement audits. On the surface, it was business. But inside North Peak, it was something else entirely, a mirror that revealed who actually carried this company on their back. From the moment I opened my inbox that morning, Henderson dominated everything. The colonel's emails. The subcontractor questions. The engineers waiting on approval chains. Every line led back to me. Not because Kenneth couldn't handle it, though he couldn't, but because the army wouldn't let him. They didn't trust him. He tried, of course. Kenneth was addicted to conference calls and status updates. I'd hear him through the glass walls, voice pitched lower, like he thought sounding authoritative was the same as being authoritative. He'd talk about synergies and resource realignment, buzzwords that meant nothing to men and women in uniform who just wanted radios that worked when lives depended on them. When the army pushed back on a spec change, Kenneth sent a 3-sentence reply promising delivery in half the time. I had to spend 2 days smoothing that over, explaining to Colonel Barnes that his timeline was a typo, not a death wish. And yet, when Jonathan asked how things were progressing, Kenneth was ready with the soundbite, "We're ahead of schedule, thanks to the new processes I've implemented." Jonathan nodded, satisfied. I said nothing. But behind my silence, something dark began to take root. Because Henderson wasn't just another contract. It was the crown jewel Kenneth planned to parade at the next board meeting, the proof of his leadership, the feather in his cap that would cement him as heir apparent to Jonathan's throne. If Henderson went smoothly, Kenneth would climb higher. If it went sideways, he'd drag me down with him. And here was the truth Kenneth never understood. Henderson didn't belong to him. It belonged to me. Every phone call, every handshake, every quiet assurance over the last 5 years had built that deal. The colonel didn't say, "We trust North Peak." She said, "We trust you, Adam." That contract lived and breathed because of me, and me alone. I started to see the lines more clearly, the invisible ledger of power. Kenneth had the title. I had the leverage. Kenneth had the office. I had the relationships. He thought his smirk and MBA made him untouchable. What he didn't realize was that the very contract he wanted to use as his trophy was the same one I could use as my knife. That night, as the office emptied and the glow of monitors dimmed, I sat alone at my desk staring at 2 things. Jonathan's framed photo in the hallway and the blinking cursor on my computer screen. Jonathan had given Kenneth power on paper. But Henderson had given me something far greater, the ability to decide, quietly and cleanly, whose empire this company really was. And for the first time, I didn't just feel anger toward Kenneth. I felt something sharper, colder. I felt strategy. By Friday, the Henderson contract had become Kenneth's entire personality. He breezed into the office early, carrying a latte the size of his ego, whistling like he'd already won a promotion. His new thing was visibility, looping himself into every email thread, CCing Jonathan on updates I'd already handled, inserting his commentary like a parasite feeding off the work of others. At 9 o'clock sharp, he gathered a handful of staff for what he called a progress alignment. It wasn't a meeting, it was a performance. Kenneth stood at the head of the glass conference table, sleeves rolled just enough to show off his watch, pacing like a coach before a championship. "The Henderson contract," he announced, "is proof of what North Peak can achieve when leadership steps up." I sat in the corner, laptop open, silent. He clicked through a slide deck, my numbers, my updates, my negotiations, dressed up in corporate jargon. Efficiency, cost optimization, accelerated timelines. He spoke as if the army had awarded the contract to him personally. Then came the kicker. "I want to thank Adam for supporting the team during my absence," Kenneth said, flashing me that smirk. "It's been a learning opportunity for him, and I'm glad to see him growing into the role." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were untrue, but because they were so brazenly calculated. He wasn't just stealing credit anymore. He was rewriting the story, casting me as the apprentice, the backup, the replaceable cog. Around the table, a few nods followed. Not agreement, exactly, more like submission. People didn't want the hassle of challenging him. Jonathan wasn't there to set the record straight. Kenneth's version of reality spread unchecked, like mold in a damp room. I closed my laptop before I broke a key. But anger wasn't the only thing rising in me anymore. Something else had taken root during those 3 days back in the office, resolve. I finally saw the playing field for what it was. Kenneth thought he was building an empire, but he was building it on a foundation I controlled. Every subcontractor, every army officer, every handshake that mattered, it all flowed through me. Henderson wasn't just leverage. It was a fuse. And Kenneth had no idea he was standing on top of the powder keg. That afternoon, As the office thinned out and Kenneth retreated to his corner with another urgent call, I walked down to the lobby. The autumn light cut sharp through the glass, catching the dust motes in the air. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the screen, and finally did what I'd hesitated to do all week. I opened my private contacts list. Not the company Rolodex. Mine. The first name stared back at me, Colonel Patricia Barnes. Kenneth had the office. The title. The corner seat at the table. But I had the trust. And trust, I realized, is harder to replace than any employee. It was just after 7:30 that evening when I made the call. The office was empty, save for the cleaning crew moving quietly through the halls. Kenneth had already left, off to whatever downtown steakhouse fed his appetite for self-congratulation. I scrolled through my contacts, found the number I needed, and pressed call. Barnes, the voice answered, crisp and direct as ever. Colonel, it's Adam. There was a pause, then a warmth in her tone. Adam, I was hoping to hear from you. Thought you might have gone dark after your trip. I smiled faintly. Not a chance. Just recalibrating. She didn't need details. She knew. People like her always did. Good. Because I'll be honest, this Henderson deal is only as solid as the man I'm speaking to right now. Your boss. He doesn't get it. The words hit me harder than I expected. I leaned against the cool glass of the conference room, staring at the city lights below. I know, I said quietly. I've seen the same thing. Barnes exhaled sharply, the sound of frustration I'd heard 100 times from her before. He talks like a salesman. Doesn't listen. Doesn't understand what we actually need. If it weren't for you, Adam, I'd already be looking elsewhere. There it was. Confirmation. Out loud. For years, I'd told myself I was just the engine behind the machine, that Jonathan owned the company, Kenneth played the figurehead, and my role was to keep the gears moving. But in that moment, listening to Barnes, I realized something radical. I was the machine. Without me, Henderson collapsed. Without me, North Peak's government division collapsed. And Kenneth. He'd be left standing in his polished shoes, holding a title with no substance behind it. Colonel, I said slowly, choosing each word, if I weren't here tomorrow, would that change how you felt about this deal? There was silence on the line. Heavy. Deliberate. Then Barnes answered in the way only a seasoned officer could, direct, uncompromising. If you're not here, Adam, there is no deal. Not for me. Not for Henderson. Not for anyone I represent. The air in my lungs felt different after that. Cleaner. Sharper. Because now I knew. The power Kenneth pretended to hold wasn't his. It was mine. Always had been. And power, once recognized, can't be unseen. When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the glass wall. Same tired eyes, same worn suit. But behind them, something had shifted. Kenneth thought I was easily replaceable. But the truth was, he was. And for the first time, I began to wonder just how far I was willing to take that truth. The following Monday, Kenneth was already in the office when I arrived. A rare occurrence. He stood in the hallway outside his glass palace, sleeves rolled, barking into his phone like a general commanding invisible troops. Barnes needs to understand, he snapped, pacing. This contract doesn't move without my approval. I nearly laughed. My approval. My calls. My fingerprints were on every signature of Henderson, and Kenneth knew it. He was posturing, for the board, for himself, maybe even to drown out the quiet truth he couldn't face. I walked past him without a word. He shot me a glance, sharp but fleeting, as though testing whether I'd flinch. I didn't. By 10 a.m., his leadership had already created chaos. He'd promised Jonathan that Henderson's Phase 2 specs were greenlit. They weren't. He'd assured the army that production could start early. It couldn't. And when Barnes emailed directly, short, clipped, need clarification on deliverables, Kenneth forwarded it to me with a single line, handle this. For a moment, I hovered over the keyboard, ready to type the reply that would smooth everything over like always. But then I stopped. A different idea took hold. What if I didn't reply? What if, for once, I let Kenneth own his promises? Let his words stand on their own, naked, unsupported by my midnight corrections? The thought felt dangerous, reckless, but also liberating. So I waited. By noon, Barnes sent a second email, this one sharper. Adam, need answers today. Kenneth stormed into my cubicle, jaw tight. Why is she asking you directly? He hissed. I looked up, calm. Because I'm the one she trusts. For the first time, Kenneth didn't have a smirk ready. His lips pressed thin, eyes darting as if searching for a comeback that never arrived. He muttered something about chain of command and retreated, but the silence he left behind spoke volumes. That evening, as the office emptied, I pulled out a flash drive from my desk drawer. A small, silver thing. Inside it, years of my work. Contract drafts, contact lists, back-channel notes that never touched the official servers. My map of the kingdom. I plugged it in, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen as files copied over. To anyone else, it was just data. But I knew better. This wasn't just information, it was leverage. It was the proof of what Kenneth didn't understand. Without me, North Peak's government contracts weren't just vulnerable. They were dead. As the final file transferred, I sat back in my chair, heart steady. I had become something Kenneth couldn't fight, couldn't fire, couldn't even see for what it was. I had become a ghost in the system. And soon, Kenneth would learn what it meant to have a ghost holding the strings. 2 days later, the test came. Not one I planned, but one that revealed everything. At 8:15 a.m., Kenneth strode into my cubicle, voice lowered like he was offering classified intel. Board wants Henderson updates. I'll need a summary by noon. Translation: do the work, so I can present it as mine. I nodded, expression neutral. Sure. But instead of writing the polished, bulletproof brief I normally produced, I gave him exactly what he asked for, nothing more. A summary. Short, vague, stripped of the context only I could supply. Phase 2 pending clarifications. Procurement schedule unchanged. Technical adjustments under review. That was it. 3 sentences. I sent it over at 10 o'clock sharp. By noon, I heard his voice booming from the boardroom. He was in his element, selling half-truths as gospel, sprinkling buzzwords like confetti. I pictured him pacing, gesturing, working the room with that confident swagger. Then it happened. Through the glass, I saw Jonathan leaning forward, eyebrows pinched. He interrupted Kenneth mid-sentence. Papers shuffled. Questions flew. Kenneth's smile faltered. His hands stilled. He glanced at the door, as if he wanted me to walk in and rescue him. But I didn't move. I sat at my desk, typing steadily, as though the chaos unraveling 20 feet away had nothing to do with me. My phone buzzed. An internal message popped up from Jonathan's assistant. Can you step into the boardroom? They need clarification. I stared at the message for a long second, then typed back. Happy to, if Kenneth requests it. Minutes crawled. The muffled voices inside the boardroom rose, sharp edges of frustration bleeding through the glass. Then the door burst open. Kenneth emerged, face tight, sweat at his collar. He stalked past me without a word, straight into his office, slamming the door behind him. 5 minutes later, Jonathan himself walked out. He didn't slam anything. He just paused by my desk, resting a hand on the divider. Adam, he said, voice low, we'll need to talk soon. And then he walked away. The message was clear. Kenneth had been tested, and failed. And the board had seen it. That night, as I drove home, the city lights blurred past the windshield. For the first time, I didn't feel chained to North Peak. I felt free. Because now I knew I didn't need to pull the trigger on Kenneth. He was already crumbling under the weight of his own lies. All I had to do was step back, and let gravity do the rest. The morning after the boardroom debacle, the atmosphere in the office had shifted. It wasn't loud, not obvious, but I could feel it. The way conversations hushed when Kenneth passed by. The way people's eyes lingered just a second too long on him, then slid toward me. Kenneth stormed around like a wounded animal, barking orders with twice the volume, trying to reassert control. But the harder he pushed, the clearer it became, his grip was slipping. By 11 o'clock, the inevitable happened. Jonathan called me into his office. Shut the door, Adam. I did. Jonathan sat behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The lines on his face looked deeper than I remembered. For the first time in 12 years, he seemed tired. He leaned back, studying me. What the hell happened in there yesterday? I kept my voice even. Kenneth presented incomplete information. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Incomplete or incorrect? I met his gaze. Both. Silence. Heavy, expectant. Finally, Jonathan sighed. You know what I hate, Adam? I hate feeling like I can't trust the people in this building. I brought Kenneth in to scale this company, to build structure. But when push comes to shove, it's always you the clients call. Always you cleaning up the mess. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Tell me honestly, if I pulled you out of North Peak tomorrow, what happens to Henderson? There it was. The question I'd been waiting for. I didn't rush my answer. I let the weight of it fill the room before I spoke. If I walk, Henderson walks with me. The army doesn't trust the company. They trust me. Jonathan exhaled slowly, nodding, as though I'd just confirmed a suspicion he'd carried for years. That's what I thought. He stood, walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. So here's the problem. Kenneth's supposed to be the future. But right now, he's looking like a liability. And you, he turned, eyes sharp. You're looking like the only thing keeping us in the game. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Jonathan studied me another moment, then gave a small, tired smile. Funny thing about loyalty, Adam. It only works when it goes both ways. He dismissed me with a nod, but his words followed me out of the office, heavy as iron. Kenneth was unraveling. Jonathan was wavering. And me. I was no longer just an employee. I was the deciding factor. 3 days after Kenneth's replaceable jab, I sat in my truck in the North Peak parking lot, engine idling. The radio hummed softly, but my mind wasn't on the music. My hands rested on the steering wheel, still, heavy. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number, though I recognized the name immediately. Vincent Shaw, CEO of Sterling Solutions. Adam, still interested in that senior partner position we discussed? Call me. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. The message felt like a blade sliding quietly across a throat, not cutting yet, but promising what could come. I remembered the defense conference 6 months ago. Vincent in his tailored suit, calm and assured. We'd shared a drink, and he'd asked, half joking, half deadly serious, what it would take to pull me from North Peak. I'd brushed it off back then. Loyalty had seemed like a currency worth something. But now Kenneth's smirk burned in my memory. Easily replaceable. The words replayed like a broken record, and with each repetition, my loyalty eroded a little more. I thought of Colonel Barnes, who always asked for me by name. Of the procurement officer at Wright-Patterson who refused to return Kenneth's calls but picked up mine on the first ring. Of Jonathan, who had let Kenneth sit in the big chair while I carried the weight of every government contract. Loyalty suddenly felt like a bad investment. I hit call. Adam, Vincent's voice came smooth, direct. Good to hear from you. Let's not waste time. One of my senior partners retired last week. I want you. Full partnership track, equity stake. Every government relationship you've built, yours to manage, no interference. What timeline are we talking? My throat tightened. I glanced through the windshield at North Peak's glass facade. Kenneth's silhouette moved in his office, gesturing animatedly on the phone. No doubt taking credit for something I had set in motion months ago. What kind of timeline? I asked. 1 week if you can swing it. 2 at most. The air inside the truck felt suddenly sharper, clearer. Send me the paperwork. When I hung up, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel triumph. I felt clarity. Cold, steady, undeniable clarity. I was done being replaceable. The next morning, my resignation letter was 2 sentences long. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position at North Peak Engineering. Thank you for the opportunity. I printed it, signed it, and walked straight into Jonathan's office. He looked up, confused. Adam, what's this? Kenneth was right, I said, placing the letter on his desk. I'm easily replaceable. So you won't have any trouble finding someone else to manage Henderson, Wright-Patterson, or Aberdeen. His face drained of color as the names landed like hammer blows. Adam, wait, let's talk about this. But I was already walking out, 12 years of loyalty packed neatly into 3 cardboard boxes. By the time I loaded the last box into my truck, Kenneth had returned from lunch. He stood in the parking lot, tie loosened, coffee in hand, watching me with that same arrogant smirk. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. Some victories don't need sound, they're written in silence. Halfway down the interstate, my phone buzzed. A text from Colonel Patricia Barnes. Henderson Defense contract cancelled. Effective immediately. Her message was copied to Kenneth and Jonathan. I pulled to the shoulder, cut the engine, and just sat there. 12 years of work severed with one message. But it wasn't my loss, it was theirs. Henderson wasn't a contract. It was a bond. And Kenneth had just learned bonds don't transfer on paper. At 6 p.m., Jonathan called. Adam, we need to talk. This is bigger than Kenneth. His voice was strained, frantic. The Henderson deal is worth $25 million over 3 years. Barnes won't take Kenneth's calls. She says the contract is dead unless you're managing it personally. I looked across the Sterling conference table where Vincent slid the partnership agreement toward me. His pen gleamed under the overhead light. That's unfortunate, I said. Jonathan's voice sharpened. Don't play games with me. 12 years should count for something. I signed the agreement while Jonathan's desperation crackled through the line. You're right, I said. 12 years should count for something. But you restructured us into this mess. You let Kenneth run a business he doesn't understand, with relationships he didn't build. And now you're paying the price. Silence. Then, barely controlled, what do you want? I glanced at Vincent, who was smiling faintly, already seeing the empire shifting. I want Kenneth to understand what easily replaceable actually means. I hung up. By morning, the fallout began. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base pulled their $15 million radar upgrade. Aberdeen Proving Ground froze negotiations on an $8 million annual facility contract. Each notice carried the same brutal phrase, primary contractor relationship terminated. North Peak had lost nearly $50 million in less than 48 hours. And Kenneth. He was still telling himself it was just paperwork. By the 3rd day at Sterling, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls from Jonathan. Voicemails from North Peak's legal department. Even Kenneth tried reaching out, though I never answered. Then came the call that mattered. Unknown number, but the area code was unmistakable. I picked up. Memphis, this is Adam. Adam, this is Colonel Patricia Barnes. Her tone was brisk, professional, but there was something underneath. Steel wrapped in finality. Colonel, I said, standing automatically as if still reporting to an officer. Good to hear from you. I'll be blunt, she said. Jonathan Rivers has been calling me non-stop. He seems to believe Henderson is still a negotiation. I want to make sure there's no misunderstanding. It isn't. I leaned against the conference table, watching the Memphis skyline glitter outside Sterling's 20th floor windows. I understand. No, Adam. I don't think you do. Papers shuffled on her end of the line. This project involves classified integration. The timeline doesn't allow for training new personnel. And after 8 years of working with you directly, I'm not about to start over with someone who doesn't understand how this works. Her words landed with surgical precision. Henderson wasn't North Peak's project. It was mine. And it's not just Henderson, she continued. I've spoken with Wright-Patterson and Aberdeen. Consensus is unanimous. We work with you, or we find new contractors. North Peak without Adam isn't North Peak as far as the Department of Defense is concerned. For a moment, I couldn't answer. I'd always believed I was building something for the company. But in truth, I'd been building something else entirely, a network of trust tied not to a brand, but to my name. When the line went silent, I finally managed, "Thank you, Colonel. That's clear." Good. I don't say this lightly, Adam. You've earned a reputation. Don't waste it at a place that doesn't respect what that means. When the call ended, I sat in the empty conference room for 10 minutes, processing it. I hadn't just walked away with a job. I'd walked away with the very foundation of North Peak's government business. Vincent appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised. Everything all right? I looked at him, the weight of realization settling in. Better than all right. For 8 years, I thought I was working for North Peak. Turns out, the government was always working with me. And Kenneth had just taught the entire industry a brutal truth. Some relationships belong to companies. But the ones that matter, they belong to people. By the end of the week, the cracks at North Peak weren't cracks anymore, they were canyons. Jonathan's emails shifted from "we can fix this" to "please call me back" to a single, desperate line. "Adam, the board is demanding answers. Kenneth is unstable. We need to talk." Word traveled faster than I expected. Vendors were pulling out of pending bids. Subcontractors stopped returning Kenneth's calls. Even recruiters were circling North Peak employees, whispering that the company's government wing was finished. But the most satisfying blow came quietly, from an old friend. "Adam, you'll want to hear this," said Frank Dawson, a contractor liaison I'd worked with for years. He lowered his voice, though we weren't in the same room. "Kenneth walked into a Pentagon briefing yesterday. Tried to pitch the Henderson replacement plan. And?" I asked, already knowing. "They cut him off before the first slide. Colonel Barnes told him, 'With Adam gone, this discussion is over.'" Then she stood up and walked out. I pictured Kenneth standing there, sweating in his $1,000 suit, realizing the room didn't even pretend to respect him anymore. The fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours, North Peak stock dropped 18%. An internal memo leaked. Half their government staff were already polishing resumes. Jonathan stripped Kenneth of direct client authority, though he left him with the title. A crown with no kingdom. And me. I was sitting in Sterling's corner office, a stack of new contracts on my desk. Henderson, Wright-Patterson, Aberdeen, all signed under Sterling's name, with my name on the first line of every agreement. That night, as I left the office, I saw Kenneth's face on my phone screen, his number flashing. I let it ring out. He called again. Then again. Finally, he left a voicemail. "Adam, we need to talk. I may have underestimated things. Just call me back. Please." The arrogance was gone. The smirk had evaporated. His voice was raw, panicked. I replayed it once, twice, 3 times. And then I deleted it. Kenneth had been right about one thing: I was replaceable. Just not in the way he imagined. 2 weeks later, Vincent asked me to join him at the Sterling Downtown Club, a quiet place, polished wood, soft jazz, where deals worth hundreds of millions lived and died over bourbon. When I arrived, Vincent wasn't alone. Jonathan was there. He looked 10 years older, hair disheveled, shoulders slumped. Kenneth sat beside him, pale and twitching, his confidence stripped bare. I slid into the booth across from them. No handshakes were offered. Jonathan spoke first. "Adam, we lost 70% of our government portfolio in 12 days. The board wants Kenneth out, but it's not enough. They're asking if we can rebuild." I sipped the bourbon Vincent had ordered for me. Smooth, deliberate. "You can't," I said flatly. Kenneth leaned forward, his voice sharp with desperation. "Come on, Adam. We both know you built those contracts on North Peak's back. On our infrastructure. On our funding. You owe us." I cut him off with a look. "I don't owe you anything. You told me I was replaceable. That's the only truth you've ever spoken. You replaced me, and in doing so, you replaced your entire future." His jaw worked like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Jonathan tried again, voice softer. "If there's anything we can do, equity, partnership, board seat. Just tell us." For a moment, I let the silence hang. The power shift was total, undeniable. They weren't negotiating. They were begging. Finally, I leaned forward. "There's nothing you can offer. North Peak is finished in the government sector. The DoD doesn't trust your name. They trust mine. And I've already decided where that trust belongs." I stood, dropped a 50 on the table for the drink I hadn't ordered, and looked Kenneth dead in the eye. "You asked if I wanted to be part of this new direction, Kenneth. The answer is no. My direction is forward. Yours," I gestured vaguely toward the door, "is out." And with that, I walked away. Behind me, Jonathan muttered something, but Kenneth sat frozen, staring down at the empty glass in front of him. The man who once told me I was replaceable had just learned the cruelest truth. It was him who had always been optional. 3 months later, the headline hit the Memphis Business Journal. North Peak Engineering sells remaining assets to Sterling Solutions after government collapse. The article painted it clinically, like it was just another corporate shuffle. But I knew the truth. North Peak hadn't been acquired, it had been gutted. Its government wing was dead before Sterling even signed the papers. All that remained were scraps, a few commercial clients, some equipment, a fading name. Kenneth's name wasn't mentioned once. Jonathan got a polite paragraph, quoted as stepping down for personal reasons. Translation: the board had finally forced him out. And me. I was quoted as Sterling's new senior partner for defense and government operations, overseeing a portfolio that had doubled in size since the collapse. Henderson, Wright-Patterson, Aberdeen, those were only the beginning. Other bases, other agencies, started calling. Word spread fast in DC and beyond: if you want something done right, call Adam Memphis. But the real obituary didn't run in the paper. It ran quietly, in whispered conversations over defense conferences, in contractor meetings, in Pentagon hallways. North Peak. They're done. They lost Memphis. The company name became shorthand for failure. A cautionary tale of arrogance, of leaders who forgot who actually built the bridge they were standing on. One night, sitting in my new office overlooking the Mississippi River, I listened again to Kenneth's last voicemail, the one where his voice cracked, where the panic finally broke through his arrogance. "Adam, we need to talk. Please." I kept it saved, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. A reminder of what happens when you let the wrong man sit in the big chair. Some men believe titles make them powerful. But titles are fragile. Paper. Replaceable. What isn't replaceable are the people who do the work, build the trust, and carry the weight. And in the end, Kenneth was never more than what he made me out to be, replaceable. Only difference was, I found a better seat. 6 months after North Peak's collapse, I was at a defense technology expo in Arlington. Sterling's booth was the centerpiece, bright, polished, crowded with brass and contractors. Every handshake carried weight. Every nod confirmed the new reality. I wasn't the shadow behind the curtain anymore. I was the name on the banner. That's when I saw him. Kenneth. Not in a suit, not with his polished arrogance. He wore an off-the-rack blazer that didn't fit, collar wilted, hair unkempt. He hovered near the periphery of the expo floor, trying, and failing, to look like he belonged. For a moment, our eyes met. His widened, just slightly, before he looked away. He didn't approach me. He didn't dare. He lingered by the coffee table, attempted to insert himself into conversations, and was quietly brushed aside each time. To the crowd here, Kenneth wasn't the new direction. He was the man who lost Memphis. Later that afternoon, as I left for a private dinner with 2 Air Force generals, I passed him near the exit. He shifted as if he might speak, but the words died before they formed. I walked past without slowing. That night, over bourbon and strategy, one of the generals leaned back and smirked. "Is that true what I heard? North Peak's golden boy is trying to start a consulting firm out of Nashville." The table chuckled. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Kenneth had become a ghost, still haunting the edges of the industry, but stripped of all substance. A cautionary figure everyone recognized but no one respected. And as I lifted my glass, I realized something. Revenge wasn't the contracts, or the corner office, or even North Peak's death. Revenge was Kenneth standing in a crowded expo hall, invisible. Replaceable. Exactly as he had once declared me to be. It didn't surprise me when the subpoena arrived. A thick envelope, courier delivered to Sterling's 20th floor. Inside, North Peak Engineering versus Adam Memphis, Sterling Solutions. Allegations of breach of contract, misappropriation of trade secrets, interference with existing business relationships. Kenneth's signature sat smugly beneath the complaint, though Jonathan's name appeared nowhere. I almost laughed. Kenneth was predictable. When arrogance fails, desperation reaches for lawyers. Vincent read through it, shaking his head. Weak. They're claiming you stole government contacts. But those contacts were never theirs to begin with. He was right. Contracts don't belong to companies, they belong to the relationships behind them. And Barnes, Dawson, every officer and base commander had made their position clear. They worked with me, not North Peak. 2 months later, the case went before a federal judge. Kenneth sat at the plaintiff's table, thinner than I remembered, tie crooked. He wouldn't look at me. The judge skimmed the filings, unimpressed. Mr. Shaw, the government contracts at issue were terminated by the government itself. Not transferred. Not stolen. Terminated. Your argument assumes a property right that doesn't exist. Kenneth's lawyer stammered something about goodwill and reasonable expectation. The judge leaned forward, voice cold. You don't own people's trust. Case dismissed. The gavel struck. Final. I caught Kenneth's eyes across the courtroom. For a flicker of a moment, I saw it, the exact instant he realized he had nothing left. Not contracts. Not reputation. Not even the law on his side. Only failure. A year later, Sterling sent me to keynote the Defense Integration Summit in D.C. 500 officers, contractors, and analysts packed into a hotel ballroom. Cameras, lights, applause. My name on the program, my face on the big screen. I spoke about resilience, about trust, about the bridge between innovation and loyalty. Not once did I mention North Peak. They weren't worth the breath. Afterward, while shaking hands in the lobby, I saw him. Kenneth. No badge. No booth. Just standing near the back wall, thinner than ever, clothes wrinkled, eyes hollow. He wasn't here as a participant, he was here as an outsider, watching the life he'd lost. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. Then I remembered the smirk, the words that had set everything in motion. Adam, you're easily replaceable. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. The crowd between us said everything. Generals, contractors, executives, each one shaking my hand, saying my name, seeking my approval. Kenneth faded into the background, swallowed by the very world he once believed he owned. 2 years later, I sat in Sterling's Memphis office, watching the sun set over the Mississippi. On my desk, a letter of recommendation I'd just signed for a young engineer, bright, sharp, hungry. She reminded me of myself a decade earlier. Overlooked, underestimated, grinding in the shadows while others took credit. I handed her the letter personally. Remember this, I told her. Companies rise and fall. Titles come and go. What lasts are the relationships you build. Protect those, and no one can replace you. She nodded, eyes wide, already understanding more than Kenneth ever had. When she left, I leaned back, listening to the quiet hum of the city. Revenge had brought me here, yes. But legacy, that was what would carry me forward. Kenneth was gone, North Peak was forgotten, and the word replaceable no longer haunted me. Because in the end, I hadn't just survived it. I had proven the truth Kenneth could never see. Some men are forgotten. Others become unforgettable. And I was never replaceable.